October 1997. A racing pigeon named Billy Bones is released 400 miles from his loft outside Sheffield, along with 3,000 other birds in the same competitive race. A storm rolls in over the channel. Radar stations lose most of the flock in the weather. Billy Bones doesn't come home that day. Or the next. His owner writes him off, logs him as lost, the way racing pigeon keepers write off maybe 1 in 5 birds every season. 4 years later, a pigeon lands on the same loft, in the same village, and walks straight to the same nesting box he used before he vanished. The rings check out. It's him. 4 years. No GPS, no training in between. A bird with a brain the size of a fingertip, crossing weather systems and unfamiliar terrain to find one specific rooftop out of an entire country. Here is the part that should stop you. Nobody fully agrees on how he did it. Not one mechanism, at least 3. Most people's mental model of a homing pigeon is something close to magic, a built-in compass, a bird brain GPS chip installed by evolution, end of explanation. And to be fair, that instinct isn't unreasonable. Something in these animals clearly works like a compass. Wolfgang and Roswitha Wilczko demonstrated in 1972 that European robins orient using the Earth's magnetic field, and pigeons show the same sensitivity. So the compass idea isn't wrong. It's just the least interesting part of the story, and treating it as the whole answer has actually held pigeon and goose research back for decades. By the end of this, you'll understand why a pigeon released from a location it has never seen before, wearing a device that scrambles its sense of smell, can still identify roughly which direction home lies, but gets the exact route wrong. That gap between right direction and wrong route is where the real science lives. So let's start with what a pigeon is actually working with. It isn't one sense, it's at least 3 separate systems stacked on top of each other, and researchers have spent 50 years trying to pull them apart. There's the magnetic sense first. Pigeons appear to detect the Earth's magnetic field using cryptochrome proteins in the retina, light-sensitive molecules that under blue light form short-lived radical pairs whose chemistry is subtly altered by magnetic orientation. Henrik Moritzon's lab at the University of Oldenburg has spent years mapping this pathway, and the leading model, described in a 2016 review in Nature by Moritzon, treats this less like a compass needle and more like a filter over the bird's vision, a faint pattern of light and dark laid over what it already sees, shifting with the direction it's facing. For a while, a second magnetic mechanism looked even more promising. Iron-rich structures in the pigeon's upper beak, described by Goethe Fleissner's team and again by a widely cited 2004 paper in Nature by Cordula Mora and colleagues, which proposed these as magnetite-based sensory organs. It was a tidy story, a literal compass needle made of iron sitting in the beak. Then, in 2012, a follow-up study in Nature, led by Christoph Treiber, ran high-resolution imaging on those same cells and found they weren't sensory neurons at all. They were macrophages, immune cells, the kind that mop up iron elsewhere in the body, with no nerve connections to the brain whatsoever. A decade of theory, undone by better imaging. This is what real science looks like. Not a straight line, but a correction. Then there's the part most people have never heard of, and it's the part that explains the direction problem. Starting in the 1970s, Italian biologist Floriano Papi proposed that pigeons build a mental map not from vision or magnetism, but from smell, learning as chicks which odors arrive on the wind from which directions near their home loft. Surgically or chemically block a pigeon's sense of smell, and Papi found something striking. The bird still tries to fly home, but its initial orientation becomes measurably worse. It knows there's a home to aim for. It's lost the map telling it which way that home actually is from an unfamiliar release point. Picture it from the pigeon's position. You're released in a field you've never stood in before. You have no visual landmarks to work from. But the air itself carries information, a faint chemical signature that shifted incrementally the whole flight out, and that your brain quietly logged the entire time. You're not reading a map, you're standing inside one, and it's made of smell. And then there's the part almost nobody expects. In 2004, Tim Guilford's team at Oxford fitted homing pigeons with GPS loggers, not just once, but across repeated releases from the same site, and found something that undercuts the whole innate compass narrative. Experienced pigeons develop personal idiosyncratic routes. They follow roads, they trace motorways and railway lines, banking at the same junctions release after release, sometimes adding distance rather than cutting the direct line home. That's not an instinct, that's memory, that's a bird building a habit out of landmarks, the same way you'd learn a commute. So the honest picture of how a pigeon gets home isn't one sense, its magnetic field as scaffolding, smell as long-range map, and visual landmark memory as local navigation. 3 systems, layered, each covering for the other's blind spots. Here's what's stranger though. Geese don't use most of this at all, because geese don't need to rediscover home. They're taught it. Konrad Lorenz's imprinting experiments in the 1930s showed that goslings fix, within hours of hatching, on whatever moving object is present. A parent goose, or famously Lorenz himself in rubber boots. That bond isn't just social, it's the delivery mechanism for an entire migratory route. A goose doesn't inherit the flight path to its wintering grounds the way a monarch butterfly inherits a genetic route it's never flown before. It learns it, wingtip to wingtip, by following adults who already know the way. The turns around mountain ranges, the safe stop over wetlands, the timing tied to weather systems. This was demonstrated with real consequences in reintroduction programs for other migratory birds facing the same problem. Captive-bred whooping cranes with no wild parents to follow. A landmark 2013 study in Science by Thomas Mueller and colleagues tracked cranes led south by ultralight aircraft standing in for a parent flock, and found something with direct bearing on geese. Birds that migrated with older, more experienced individuals in the group stayed closer to the ideal migratory corridor, and that accuracy kept improving with age and flock experience. The route wasn't fixed at hatching, it was a piece of cultural knowledge, refined generation over generation, carried in the heads of the birds that had flown it before, and lost instantly in populations that lose their elders. That reframes the entire pigeon story too. A pigeon's smell map and road memory are personal knowledge, built alone, flight by flight. A goose's migratory route is inherited knowledge, passed down through a social structure, closer to an oral tradition than an instinct. 2 birds, 2 completely different information systems, both landing on the same outcome, getting home. And this changes something practical, depending on which of these birds is in front of you. If you keep pigeons, racing or otherwise, a young bird released too far from home, too early, before it has built its odor map or logged its landmark routes, isn't failing an instinct test. It's missing data it hasn't had time to collect. Route training, short, gradually extending releases from familiar directions, isn't sentimental handholding. It's literally how the smell map and the road memory get built in the first place. And if you're involved in raising or relocating geese, whether that's a farm flock, a rehabilitation situation, or a reintroduction effort, the Lorenz research means the birds around them in the first hours and days matter more than almost anything else you'll do for them. A gosling raised without adult geese to follow isn't just missing company. It's missing its only source for a piece of knowledge that no gene sequence supplies, which direction to fly and when. We keep looking for a single hidden sense that explains how an animal finds its way. One compass, one instinct, one clean mechanism we can point to and say, there, that's the trick. What the pigeon and the goose actually show us is closer to what's true of most animal minds we've bothered to study carefully. Not one elegant system, but several imperfect ones, layered, correcting for each other's gaps, some inherited and some taught, some carried alone and some carried by a flock. So next time you see pigeons wheeling over a rooftop, or geese lifting off a pond in a ragged V, ask yourself which parts of that flight are memory, which parts are inheritance, and which parts you're only assuming are instinct because no one ever told you to look closer. If you want to be part of a community that's learning to actually see the animals we live alongside, instead of assuming we already know them, that's what Barn Mind is for. Subscribe and let's keep looking closer.